Greetings and welcome back to Relationships Unfiltered, a podcast about relationships, love, lifestyle, passion, romance, sex, and a whole bunch more. Again, this is your host here, Rashad Bakir, and I am going to continue with the series that I was introducing you with the first part on interracial relationships. And so I want to pick up on that. This is going to be just a short segment just to conclude that portion. And I will be presenting more in this interracial relationship series. So, this is probably it's going to be one of the most discussed topics that we're going to dive into repeatedly because there's so many different angles to it. So I'm going to get into a lot of regard to that. So I will want to pick up on where I ended at, and that is looking at the landscape of why we're seeing so many different interracial relationships happening. Again, understanding the state of interracial relationships along with the psychology of interracial relationships. And so, again, as I was stating earlier, that if you start with 1967, which is the year of which the interracial marriage ban nationwide was lifted by the Supreme Court decision in the Loving versus Virginia case, then you see the trajectory of which interracial relationships starts to increase. Okay, along with marriages at that. So from 67, there was 3% marriages that were interracial at the time, with a less than 3% approval by American polling at that time in the U.S. Globally is a whole different ball game because, and I'm going to discuss that part at another episode, universal interracial dating versus U.S. dating, because I have experienced both of those. So I'm going to get into that at another point. And by the way, let me just sort of say this too. You'll hear me also present more as we go along. Again, we're just getting started. I'm just getting started with this broadcast, this program. We're going to do a lot. I'm going to have some interactive stuff. We're going to do chats. I'm going to have panels. We're going to have a lot of good stuff for you folks. I will be starting a Patreon account. I will have bonus material available, extended material within the bonus package of stuff that you can subscribe to and get some added stuff, behind the scenes stuff, and all that. So stay tuned. There'll be more coming as we go along here. But anyhow, so yes, when we look at that as a sort of a start point, because that really opens things up for the interracial dating market. Okay, now granted, at that time, and I'm going to say the next series, I'm going to really get into more of the history. And I'll talk about not only the Loving case, but I'll talk about cases that predate the Loving case as well, too, with regard to that. Because people need to know this. We sort of take this for granted with regard to interracial dating today. But it's really important to have a reference of history as well, too. And that's what I'm going to get into. Because I got to get, again, understanding and dissecting the psychology. We got to get, where do these taboos come from, and these stigmas and all this other stuff start. So that's what I've got to get into in the next one, just so you know. Now, when we look at again the state of them today, like I said, they're thriving. It's none other better time if you want to get into an interrelationships. There are plentiful opportunities for anybody to do so. But yet, like I said, because the world in the 21st century is different than what it was in the 20th century. And so in 1967, we was in the 20th century, and there was a different mindset. And there was different access for folks to be able to meet people because that's what it gets down to. What is your access and opportunity and your options to meet others different from you? And so we're still at the back end of segregation, okay, from the 1950s and all this stuff. And like I said, I don't want to jump ahead too much into the history part, but I'm just trying to give you a framework so you understand. So where we get to, and then we start to see movies come into it, and that changes the culture, and certainly the explosion of hip hop in pop music and so forth changes that. And then by the time the 80s comes, again, more opportunity for integration. You can say that word, integrating people. And by that, you get to meet folks and all that. But in general, it's about meeting someone who you find attractive and compatible with. And I'm going to do a show also on chemistry and compatibility as well, too. So stay tuned for that. But really, it gets to that to where now you can break through those, like we talked about before, the stigmas and the taboos and everything. And you finding someone who you really have some things in common with. And you find you deal with that on the human level, then the racial part of it is really less than none for a lot of people. And I've experienced that in many relationships as well with regard to that too. So there's this saying about love is love. You might have heard of it, right? There's also a saying that love is universal. There's also a saying that respects to love at first sight. And I can't help who I fall in love with. Okay. And all of those things fit under the barometer of interracial relationships, dating and marriages, etc. Love is love. And this was really one of the first, when this statement phrase was first used, it really came out of that movement of the 60s to show that. That was one of the things in the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner that was centered upon that. Two of those things. Love is love, as well as love at first sight, because that's what the lady, Catherine Houghton, I think that's her name, she who played that role as the daughter, Mary, and Sidney Poitier's character, she mentions this, okay, about the love at first sight thing. And so you have this involved in interracial relationships as well too. And so this is where this goes now. And again, like I said, so many different type of multi-racial couples, families that exist out there, and it's only going to increase. And we're going to talk also about, again, looking at the athletes, because when you see the athletes, the drafts particularly, and that was a big topic of conversation last year, as it will be this year, when they have the NFL draft and the NBA draft, because I'm going to do a segment on that once more, because you're going to have more than a few of these athletes who, one, you're going to talk about the white mamas, and then two, we're going to talk about the white girlfriends, okay, for a lot of these, particularly black athletes. So we're going to get into that. And folks was really lighting up the social media spaces and everything else, talking about that last year. In the last few years, we have seen many of these athletes with different ethnic women, okay, and so forth. And that is not going to change. It's going to only continue. It's going to probably increase in some areas of that too. So you will see that more and more, and it's here to stay, just like interracial relationships are here to stay. And people just have to get used to that. And they will, either they will or they won't. But, if you're not if you're in the want section, then you're going to be, like I said, very much ostracized, because interracial relationships is going to visit you. I have a very good friend out there who is experiencing this. right now. And as I said, it's visiting to your household, and for sure enough, it will happen at some point. If it's not your direct child, perhaps your grandchild. But at this rate now, yeah, it's visited upon many of families today. Particularly if you live in, it doesn't really matter where you live now, because you see it. You can be in Utah, you can be in Montana, you can be in Nebraska, particularly where there's college towns, because that's still, for young people, that's still one of the number one spots for interracial dating and interracial coupling and relationships. That's the epicenter of it, is college campuses first, and then probably second to that for young people would be certainly high school, K through 12, because there are a number of young people, the college sweethearts and stuff, and these folks have known each other since like high school. Patrick Mahomes, who's also biracial himself, wife, was his high school sweetheart. So a lot of these guys, they've had girlfriends and stuff, and since, some of them going back as far as like middle school or something. So they've known each other for a while, and like I said, schooling is number one for young people meeting, of course, and then for adults past the college age, it's generally workplaces. It's also again, people are traveling, so they're experiencing other environments and everything like that. And then socially, they're out, like I said, on social events, whether it be the club circuit, whether you are at, church or religion, places of worship, or, just in some social event or gathering, like be at the park somewhere, at the gym. So there are a number of places. And I would say rivaling up to that is also online, social media as well too. That's way up there too. A lot of people are meeting online, and there's plenty of interracial dating sites and social sites for people to meet, if that's your interest, because there's a certain thing in that, and so forth. And I was many years ago involved in some interracial groupings for just like interracial couples meeting, because again, there was a type of phenomenon with that that I'll get more into on the history part as well. And like I say, on the next segment, I will discuss more of that. But back, like say in the 80s, for example, when you didn't see as many interracial couples, and so there was a social thing to interracial couples, getting together, so you can talk and discuss, what's it like, and the things that you go through and the things that you learn, because a lot of, particularly for the women, particularly if it's a black male and white woman, it's always that learning curve. So they go into that, and I experienced this extensively as well too, where again, that's their first time being in an interracial relationship, and they have to know and learn the nuances of that, because as I had mentioned before, that while at the surface level of it, interracial relationship isn't much different than any other relationship. Again, that much different part is where those differences do lie. And certainly, one, you have to deal with the fact that how other people are going to respond, or when they see you and when you're out. And then mostly it's looks. And then there may be subtle comments that people might make, and so forth. Again, depending on where you're at. Like I was mentioning, there was this article that was published yesterday, a day or two, with this guy who was married interracially, and they on an airplane, and somebody thought that they were suspicious. He was suspicious, like as if he was human trafficking the woman who is his wife, but of course they didn't know that, and they had to go through all this stuff of embarrassment, because someone just on a whim looked at him as being suspicious or something to that degree, and so forth and so on. So things still happen, you know. Like I said, you know, it's not as if you can just skate through life, and nobody's gonna say anything, nobody's gonna give you any looks, and all that. You're gonna get that. But as I was saying, for a lot of times, the women, they tend to have a more naive approach to it because they aren't used to that. So they're still in their bubble of the world to where they don't look at things the same way as a person of color would do, because they are used to looks. They are used to going to places where people look at them and notice them and those sort of things. So they are much aware, and their radar is a little bit more than the white person who is oblivious to them most of the time. So they have to kind of learn that, and then once they kind of pick up on it, then they know what to look for, and they know and understand. But like I said, most of the time it's just people looking and this and that, and sometimes just out of curiosity, because it's just to see that. And at the same time, you know, the beautiful part of that, because when I have what I have experienced is I've had people walk up and say, "You guys look so beautiful together." And that's the most refreshing part of it, when you see that happen, that people can just appreciate you, and they can just tell you that, you know, you guys live together, hang in there. I mean, and sometimes you might run into other couples, and I've had that happen where I ran into older couples, and they will, just say, "Hey, how you doing?" They'll talk to you and all that stuff, and or somebody might approach you, and again, some older lady or white ladies, they'll say, "Oh, my daughter, she's married to, or got a black boyfriend, a black husband, or whatever," or something like that. Particularly when it's, when it's a black-white dynamic, I mean, that's my only experience is that. But I'm aware of others, and I'm going to get into those others during the next segment, because, like I said, interracial dating, relationships, and marriages is more than black-white, okay? But like I said, I'm going to emphasize more of the black-white because there's more to be talked about with the black-white dynamic. It's, by comparison, it's relatively boring to talk about the other ones, even though those dynamics happen. And there's some similarities in terms of, family acceptance and that type of thing. And in some families, when it comes to that, they're more socially accepting if the partner is, as I was saying this when we were talking about the numbers, is if the partner is white versus of another ethnicity. For example, let's say in Hispanic, since Hispanic and whites are the most populous interracial coupling, let's say the Hispanic family would be more accepting if the partner is white than they would be if the other partner is black, for example. So there is when you do the surveys to that, the data points out that which partner interracially would be least accepted in your family. Okay, and so in all every surveys I've done, it's always the black that is the least accepted. Okay, so white is the most accepted. This is what I'm talking about: ethnic minorities, non-white peoples. So whites are more accepted. If it's Asian, a different type of Asian would be accepted, and just depends on the demographics to that too. Sometimes, because some of them, they have little issues and stuff, but they're inter-ethnic within the ethnicity. So you would see a different, let's say if you're, Japanese, you might be more accepting to someone who is from Vietnam or something versus someone from China, that type of thing. Or other Latinos, like I said, generally they are more accepting. Now the ones who kind of crisscross, if if where you have the ethnic conflicts, it would include, let's say you got Haitians, which are not technically Hispanic because they don't speak Spanish, but Dominicans. So Haitians and Dominicans don't necessarily get along, but certainly there are inter-ethnic, couples and relationships that is happening between a Haitian and a Dominican. So, but it's not necessarily a popular thing, even though their countries are right next to each other. So those type of dynamics, you're more likely to see a Dominican with a Puerto Rican, or a Dominican with some other, a Cuban or some other Latin American person, than you would be seeing them with a Haitian person, for example, their preference and that type of thing. So those type of preferences certainly play a factor into interracial relationship and dating and stuff. People have those preferences of what they like and they don't like, or what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. That plays a factor into it, more so with other ethnic groups, like say minority groups, than it does with whites. Because as I pointed out in the data, whites are the leading out-group demographic that is tied in the interracial, spectrum here. So all those other groups, white is the preferred one before it gets to all the other ones, you see. And so that's a common thing. But whites, they're generally they're choosing whoever. It doesn't matter for them, and particularly with white women. White men, their number one demographic is with Asian women. Okay, so Asian women and then Hispanic women. Okay, for white men. Okay, Asian women, Hispanic women. Now, when we look at divorce rates, the data that showed in divorce rates, and I don't have all of the data, but I know from memory that white men and black men, women, excuse me, not black men, but that too, you can have that. But white men with black women, those interracial marriages have the lowest divorce rate amongst all of the different interracial groupings, while the highest would be, of course, the black man with the white woman. Okay, they had the highest divorce rate amongst groups, in that type of thing. Then I think Asian men and white women are in there, and Hispanic and white and so forth on. Okay, so when you look at the divorce rate, black women with white men have the lowest compared to the other groups, while black men with white women have the highest percentage of divorce amongst interracial marriages. Okay, now, so as I was saying, it comes into this preference thing, and a lot of people, they have a certain type of preference, just like they have a certain type of look, etc. If it's a white woman, the tendency is blonde hair, because that is what is promoted in the media, the image of the blonde-haired white woman. So in Asia, white women are highly, highly thought of. Blonde-haired white women are highly thought of. Black men too, the same thing. Blonde-haired women. So blonde-haired women, white women, are popular. Number one popular amongst all of these different ethnic groups when it comes to preference, okay? And then when you think about the other groups, it's just a variety of different things that comes into play. And I'm going to talk about a lot more of that as we go along here as well too, because again, as I interject on media image and how that shapes and how that's the psychology part. How does that frame the image? Because for a lot of young boys, black boys particularly, that I'll get into, that's where it starts. It starts with the media image of what you see. Then it starts, if you're playing sports, then that's another thing that plays into your likening to looking outside of your race and those sorts of things like that, and all that. And then we're certainly going to talk about oikophobia, okay, and the impact of that, okay, because that's another thing that comes into play with regard to why people are dating interracially, okay. This notion, this idea that one is rejecting their own, okay. So that's a term called oikophobia, where people don't like them. They reject their own culture, their own race and stuff, and they say, oh, you hate yourself, you're a self-hating person because you're with some other group, you prefer this other group, and particularly, like I said, when it's interracial and you're with someone who's white, okay. So that's a big thing that is popular in that equation, is the self-hating person, and so forth, that comes along into that. So that's something that we'll dive into more with as a result of this. So I'm going to pause things here because, like I said, I can talk for hours on this topic, which there's going to be a lot of more like shows, like I said, that are going to be getting into this. The next one I'm going to do on interracial relationships, like I said, is going to go into the history and psychology of interracial dating. And that'll be followed up as we're going to get to the black-white dynamic of interracial dating, which is going to be something to talk about. I think I'm probably do 2-3 shows just on those alone and break that up, and everything just for you folks. So like I said, I'm going to get into some real good stuff. So stay tuned. But the other topics I'm going to get into is I'm going to look at dating in the internet age and all that stuff. So we're going to look at how is it dating online? What are you looking for out there? We're going to look into that, what folks are looking for, and the high value, what's going on with the modern woman in the dating space. Are you a high value woman and all that stuff and what's going on? So I got some very good stuff that's going to be coming up on my upcoming shows. So stay tuned for those. I'm going to be putting out some promos very soon with that. So stay tuned, and I appreciate you tuning in once more. And don't forget, if you're watching me on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, etc. I appreciate all that. And we'll see you here next time. Thanks so much. Again, checking out Relationships Unfiltered.